and welcome to the Higher Theories Conspiracy Podcast. I am your host, Jamie. On this episode, part 2 of 9/11, the collapse of the Twin Towers. On the last episode, we went over Flight 11, the first flight that was hijacked. We went over what happened on that flight, the crew and the terrorists that were involved, and the tragic disaster that unveiled after. Next, we went over Flight 175, the second doomed airplane. We went over the crew, the hijackers, what happened, and its disaster as well. Today, I will go over Flight 77 and United Airlines Flight 93. You can find Higher Theories on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Google and Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcast. American Airlines Flight 77. American Airlines Flight 77 was a scheduled American Airlines domestic transcontinental passenger flight from Washington Dulles International Airport in Dulles, Virginia, to Los Angeles International Airport in Los Angeles, California. This flight was also hijacked. Like the others, let's start with the crew and the passengers. So this flight had 6 crew members. Captain Charles Burlingame, he was 51 years of age. First Officer David Charlebois, he was 39. Purser Renee May and flight attendants Michelle Hiddenberger, Jennifer Lewis, and Kenneth Lewis. The capacity of the aircraft was 188 passengers, but with 58 passengers on September 11th, the load factor was only 33%. Just like the other flights, this flight consisted of 5 terrorists. They were identified as Hani Hajor, Al-Hazmi, Al-Midhar, Nawaf Al-Hazmi, and Khalid Al-Mihidra. I definitely butchered those, but oh well. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the 5 hijackers arrived at Washington Dulles International Airport. At 7:15 a.m., Khalid Al-Midhar and Majid Maqad had checked in at the American Airlines ticket counter for Flight 77, arriving at the passenger security checkpoint a few minutes later at 7:18. Both men set off the metal detector and were put through secondary screening. Mohed continued to set off the alarm, so he was searched with one of those hand wands. The Hazmi brothers checked in together at the ticket counter at 7:29. Hani Hajwar checked in separately and arrived at the passenger security checkpoint at 7:35. Hajwar was followed minutes later at the checkpoint by Salim and Nawaf Al-Hazmi, who also set off the metal detector alarm. The screener at the checkpoint never resolved what set off the alarm. Apparently seen in security footage later released, Nawaf Hazmi appeared to have an unidentified item in his back pocket. Utility knives up to 4 inches were permitted at the time by the Federal Aviation Administration as carry-on items. The hijackers were all selected for extra screening of their checked bags. Hajwar, Al-Midhar, and Moqad were chosen by the computer-assisted passenger pre-screening system, while the brothers Nawaf and Salim Hazmi were selected because they did not provide adequate identification and were deemed suspicious by the airline check-in agent. Hajwar Midhar and Nawaf Al-Hazmi did not check any bags for the flight. Checked bags belonging to Mohed and Salim Hazmi were held until they boarded the aircraft. Flight 77 was scheduled to depart for Los Angeles at 8:10, with 58 passengers aboard, through gate D-26, including the 5 hijackers. The 53 other passengers on board, excluding the hijackers, were 26 men, 22 women, and 5 children, ranging in the ages from 3 to 11. Flight 77 left the gate on time and took off from runway 30 at 8:20. Shortly after the flight took off, the FAA flight controller, Danielle O'Brien, made a routine handoff of Flight 77 to a colleague at the FAA's Indianapolis Center. For reasons she couldn't explain and would never fully understand, O'Brien didn't use one of her normal send-offs to the pilots, as in, good day or have a nice flight. Instead, she told them, good luck. The 9/11 Commission estimated that the flight was hijacked between 8:51 and 8:54, which was only shortly after American Airlines Flight 11 had struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and not too long after United Airlines Flight 175 had been hijacked. The last normal radio communications from this aircraft to air traffic control occurred at 8:50. Unlike the other 3 flights, there were no reports of anyone being stabbed or a bomb threat, and the pilots were possibly not immediately killed, but were escorted to the back of the plane with the rest of the passengers. At 8:54, as the plane flew in the vicinity over Pike County, Ohio, it began to deviate from its normal assigned flight path and turned south. 2 minutes later, at 8:56, one of the terrorists switched the airplane's transponder off. The hijackers set the flight's autopilot on a course heading east towards Washington, D.C. The FAA was aware at this point that there was an emergency on board the airplane. By this time, Flight 11 had already crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and Flight 175 was known to have been hijacked and was within minutes of striking the South Tower. After learning of this second hijacking involving an American Airlines aircraft, and the hijacking involving United Airlines, American Airlines Executive Vice President Gerard Arpey ordered a nationwide stop for the airline. The Indianapolis Air Traffic Control Center, as well as American Airlines dispatchers, made several failed attempts to contact the aircraft. At the time the airplane was hijacked, it was flying over an area of limited radar coverage, with air controllers unable to contact the flight by radio. An Indianapolis official declared that it had possibly crashed at 9:09. 2 people on board the aircraft made phone calls to contacts on the ground. At 9:12, flight attendant Renee May was able to call her mother, Nancy May, in Las Vegas. During the call, which only lasted 2 minutes, May explained her flight was being hijacked by 6 people, who had forced us to the rear of the airplane. She didn't explain whether the people crowded together were crew members, passengers, or both. May asked her mother to contact American Airlines, which she and her husband promptly did. However, American Airlines was already aware of the hijacking. Between 9:16 and 9:26, passengers Barbara Olson called her husband, United States Solicitor General Theodore Olson, and reported that the airplane had been hijacked and the assailants had box cutters and knives. She reported that everyone, including the pilots, had been moved to the back of the cabin, and that the hijackers were unaware of her call. A minute into the conversation, the call was cut off. Theodore Olson contacted the command center at the Department of Justice and unsuccessfully tried to contact Attorney General John Ashcroft. The hijackers disengaged the autopilot and took over control at 9:29. According to the 9/11 Commission report, as Flight 77 was 5 miles west-southwest of the Pentagon, it made a 330-degree spiral turn clockwise. At the end of the turn, it was descending through 2,200 feet, pointed towards the Pentagon and downtown Washington. Hani Hanjar advanced the throttles to maximum power and dove towards the Pentagon. While level above the ground and seconds from impact, the wings clipped 5 street lampposts, and the right wing struck a portable generator, creating a smoke trail seconds before smashing into the Pentagon. Flight 77, flying at 530 miles per hour, or 853 kilometers an hour for us Canadian listeners, impacted the western side of the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C., at 9:37. The plane hit the Pentagon at the first floor level, and at the moment of impact, the airplane was rolled slightly to the left, with the right wing elevated. The front part of the fuselage disintegrated on impact, while the mid and tail section moved for another fraction of a second, with tail section debris penetrating furthest into the building. In all, the airplane took 0.8 of a second to fully penetrate 310 feet into the 3 outermost of the building's 5 rings, and unleashed a fireball that rose 200 feet above the building. At the time of the attacks, approximately 18,000 people worked in the Pentagon, but there were only 189 deaths at the Pentagon site, including 125 in the Pentagon building, in addition to the 64 on board the aircraft. United Airlines Flight 93, Perished Heroes. Flight 93 was a domestic scheduled passenger flight that was hijacked by 4 Al-Qaeda terrorists on board as part of the September 11 attacks. It crashed into a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, during an attempt by the passengers and crew to regain control of the plane. All 44 people on board were killed, including the 4 hijackers. The aircraft involved, a Boeing 757, was flying United Airlines' daily scheduled morning flight from Newark International Airport in New Jersey to San Francisco International Airport in California. The crew, once again, will be remembered for their bravery. It consisted of 7 members. They were Captain Jason DeHaal, age 43, First Officer Leroy Homer Jr., age 36, and flight attendants Lorraine Bay, Sandra Bradshaw, Wanda Green, Cece Lyles, and Deborah Welsh. The hijackers were Zahid Jarrah, Ahmed Al-Nimi, Ahmed Al-Hazmi, and Sahid Al-Ghamdi. The aircraft involved in the hijacking was a Boeing 757 delivered to the United Airlines in June 1996. The airplane had a capacity of 182 passengers. The September 11 flight carried 33 passengers, the 4 terrorists, and 7 crew members, a load factor of 20%. At 5:01 on the morning of September 11th, Jarrah placed a cell phone call from Newark to Manwar al-Sahini, the hijacker pilot of United Airlines Flight 175, in Boston, which authorities believe was to confirm that the plan for the attacks was proceeding. The 4 hijackers checked in for the flight between 7:03 and 7:39 Eastern Time. At 7:03, Gamdi checked in without any luggage, while Nami checked in with 2 bags. At 7:24, Hasnui checked in 1 bag, and at 7:39, Jara checked in without any luggage. Hasnui was the only hijacker selected for extra scrutiny by the computer-assisted passenger pre-screening system. His checked bag underwent extra scrutiny for explosives, with no extra scrutiny required by CAPPS at the passenger scrutiny checkpoint. None of the security checkpoint personnel reported anything unusual about the men. Hasnui and Gamdi boarded the aircraft at 7:39 and sat in first-class seats 6B and 3D. Nami boarded 1 minute later and sat in first-class seats 3C. Before boarding the plane, Jara made 5 telephone calls to Lebanon, 1 to France, and 1 to his girlfriend in Germany, to whom he'd sent a farewell letter the day before, to tell her he loved her. He boarded at 7:48 and sat in seat 1B. The aircraft was scheduled to depart at 8 o'clock, and pushed back from the gate A-17 at 8:01, but it remained delayed on the ground until 8:42 because of heavy airport congestion. This must have frightened the hijackers, sitting there, just waiting. The 3 other hijacked flights all departed within 15 minutes of their scheduled times. By the time Flight 93 became airborne, Flight 11 was 4 minutes away from hitting the North Tower, and Flight 175 was being hijacked. Flight 77 was climbing normally and was 9 minutes away from being hijacked. By 9:02, 1 minute before Flight 175 hit the South Tower, Flight 93 reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The hijacking began at 9:28. By this time, Flights 11 and 175 had already crashed into the World Trade Center, and Flight 77 was within 9 minutes of striking the Pentagon. The hijackers on those flights had waited no more than 30 minutes to commandeer the aircraft, most likely striking after the seatbelt sign had been turned off and cabin service had begun. It is unknown why the hijackers on Flight 93 waited 46 minutes to begin their assault. The evidence is that they attacked the pilots by at least 9:28 because of the flight deviated dramatically at that point, 680 feet in 30 seconds, most likely due to one of the hijackers striking the pilot and then losing control of the airplane. A few of the passengers on this flight were also able to get a few calls out. A few of them had mentioned to their loved ones that the passengers had planned to revolt. They had decided that if they were going to die anyway, they might as well try to stop the hijacking. The passenger revolt on Flight 93 began at 9:57, after the passengers voted on whether to act. By this time, Flight 77 had struck the Pentagon, and Flights 11 and 175 had struck the World Trade Center. As the revolt began, and the hijackers started maneuvering the plane violently, the plane left its Washington, D.C. course. The hijackers in the cockpit became aware of the revolt at 9:57. Jara began to roll the airplane left and right to knock the passengers off balance. He told another hijacker in the cockpit at 9:58, "They want to get in here. Hold from the inside. Hold from the inside." Jara changed tactics at 9:59 and pitched the nose of the airplane up and down to disrupt the assault. The cockpit voice recorder captured the sounds of crashing, screaming, and the shattering of glass and plates. 3 times in a period of 5 seconds, there were shouts of pain or distress from a hijacker outside the cockpit, suggesting a hijacker who was standing guard outside the cockpit was being attacked by the passengers. Jara stabilized the plane at 10 o'clock. 5 seconds later, he asked, "Is that it? Shall we finish it off?" Another hijacker responded, "No, not yet. When they all come, we finish it off." Jara, once again, pitched the airplane up and down. A passenger in the background cried, "In the cockpit, if we don't, we'll die." At 10 o'clock, 16 seconds later, another passenger yelled, "Roll it," possibly referring to using the food cart. The voice recorder captured the sound of the passengers using the food cart as a battering ram against the cockpit. At 10:03, near Indian Lake and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the plane crashed into a field near a reclaimed coal strip mine known as the Diamond T Mine, owned by PBS Coals in Stony Creek Township in Somerset County. The National Transportation Safety Board reported that the flight impacted at 563 miles per hour, or 906 kilometers per hour, at a 40-degree angle, nose down inverted. The impact left a crater 8 to 10 feet deep and 30 to 50 feet wide. The coroner ruled that everyone on board, who was still alive at the time of the crash, died instantly of blunt force trauma. So those were the second and third airplane involved in the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center. That's part 1 and part 2. Next week, I will dive into the conspiracies around the event. What could have led to all this happening? Was the Bush government the culprit? Was it just another terrorist attack on the United States? I'll go over all that and more next week on part 3 of 9/11, the collapse of the Twin Towers. You can find us on Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcast. To help out, a quick 5-star or review helps out greatly. Thank you. See you next week.